The NFL Scouting Combine is this week in Indianapolis, and it is the most overrated week on the NFL calendar. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, February 23rd, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. On today's show, we're going to talk the latest on Breece Hall. Namely, everything is up in the air as the running back approaches free agency. We'll also talk about the scouting combine, which will take place this week in Indianapolis. We'll talk about players to watch, but we will begin by me giving a controversial take, because I think that the hype around the scouting combine is completely out of control. Over the years, I've gone back and forth on whether the combine is actually useful in evaluating players. Years ago, I used to think it was completely pointless. It was just a matter of hype. My position started to evolve as I got deeper into scouting, and I started to feel that there was value. I've kind of swung back in the other direction, and I'm not ready to say that it's completely useless. I think there are players where there is value in evaluating the combine results. I think there are areas where the combine is useful, but I do think that this has become the most overhyped, the most overanalyzed week on the NFL calendar. What I will say is that in 9 out of 10 cases, the combine results should not radically alter your view on a player. You're just getting a big picture on the players' athletic tools, what you've got to work with, but nothing that's really tested this week. Even the position drills tell you as much as the film does whether a player can produce. Now, there is utility in the combine. The challenge is that the things that the combine is most valuable for are not publicized. We don't find out the results of these things. One of the most important aspects of the combine are medical evaluations. Players are examined by doctors, and if they've had a past serious injury, doctors get to take a look at it and determine whether the player has made a full recovery, whether the player is likely to make a full recovery. And unfortunately, in some cases, a condition's discovered about a player. There have been players who have gone into the combine seemingly healthy, seemingly with nothing wrong with them, and they get evaluated by doctors. And the doctors kind of figure out that, this guy's not going to hold up over the long run. And players have fallen out of the first round on that basis. It happens. Another critical aspect of the combine are the in-person interviews. These began back at the Senior Bowl in Mobile. They will continue as the weeks progress, as we get closer to the draft, as we get into in-person visit season, as we get into pro day season. But a lot of interviews will happen at the combine. And there are some players who may have what are known as character red flags. There's something that's got to be explained. It's an opportunity to explain it. It's also an opportunity to get a gauge on what a player's all about. The teams have the opportunity to ask them certain X's and O's questions, and you also get a sense of whether someone's a guy you want on your team. One of my favorite episodes of Locked On Jets of all time happened 10 years ago. It was shortly after we started this podcast, and I had the legendary offensive line coach Howard Mudd, one of the great position coaches in NFL history, also a guy who was a great player. He was a longtime offensive line coach in the league, and he told me a story. You can go back and listen to this episode. It's from 2016 about a guy he met at the combine, and they asked this player if he had ever cheated on a test before. And the player's response was, "If I'm cheating, I ain't repeating." And Howard Mudd in that podcast episode said to me, "We took that guy off our list. We knew we weren't drafting that guy." The challenge, though, is that these things are not publicized. The medicals may leak at some point, especially when we get to draft day. If a guy falls out of the first round for an unexpected reason, then sometimes you trace it back to the medicals. But the medicals aren't publicized. Neither are the interviews. Another key aspect are the measurements. Players if you go to any college team's website, every player will have a height and a weight listed, but these are notoriously unreliable. And the measurements actually matter quite a bit here because you get a sense of whether a guy's a prototypical size for his position, prototypical height, prototypical weight. That can matter because sometimes a guy comes in and he's surprisingly undersized. And that's the sort of thing that actually makes you reconsider whether or not he can hold up in the NFL. Another thing to watch, though, is if a guy comes in and he's underweight, sometimes he's doing that to try and kind of cheat the system. Sometimes he's trying to improve his time in the 40 because if he's running lighter, that can be the sort of thing that improves your time. So that's another thing that can help you contextualize the results. Beyond that, though, I do think there's utility. I just think it's overrated. I think the combine's good as an elimination tool. Running a 4.3 40 as a wide receiver does not guarantee that you're going to be a good receiver in this league, but running a 4.8 4.9 40 almost guarantees you can't play in the league. And you go across the positions, there are certain thresholds you need to reach in these athletic testing drills. If you can't reach them, then it's a pretty big red flag. I think that for smaller school prospects, the combine does matter because there's always that question, and I mentioned this before the Senior Bowl. Are you producing because you're really an NFL caliber prospect, or are you producing just because the competition isn't very good? When you go to a small school, the guys you are up against are not NFL caliber prospects. So you can be a dominant player against those guys and still not be somebody who's going to have success in the NFL. The combine doesn't tell us everything, but if you run a fast 40, if you do well at the 3-cone drill and the short shuttle, then that's a sign that maybe your production is a little bit more legitimate. Maybe it's a sign that you have a better chance of holding up against NFL caliber players. And beyond that, you just don't want to see any bad surprises. You want the guys you're expecting to look like athletic, dominating players to test at a really, really high level. I think that can matter. And there are certain guys who, need to do better than others. A guy who's a receiver on the smaller side who's going to have to win by creating separation, by having speed, you'd like to see him do well. Now, even with this said, I'm not sure how much it matters. I think it matters to a degree, but the drills you're doing here are not the drills you do during a game. You're not wearing pads. You're not in a game situation where you can get hit. You're not making the sorts of cuts, even in some of the drills that test your movement skills. You're not making the sort of cuts that you would in an NFL game. Another factor here is I think the combine is going to become less and less relevant as time goes forward because there has been a rise in recent years of technology that allows you to track a player's movements. This has happened in the NFL level. It's happening more and more on the major college level where teams can now figure out how fast the player is going on the field. And that information is going to be much more valuable to you than a 40 time. Now, there could still be some utility in figuring out what a player's top speed is when he's totally maxing out. I mean, that is a data point that might be worth considering. But the data that you get from the player tracking stuff is more relevant to football. The combine's never going away. It's become such an event. It's generated such hype that I don't think it's going anywhere, even as its utility falls. And I think its utility will fall, at least in terms of the athletic testing portion, quite a bit as we move forward. It's, the combine's not going anywhere because fans are into it. It's kind of like a convention for people who work in the league. It's a fun event for guys who work for teams to go to. So it's not going away. But I think you just need to consider what matters at the combine and what doesn't. I think that there are going to be a lot of results this week that teams will overthink, that will make a team elevate a player up his draft board more than they should, or drop a player more than they should. It's important to keep things in context. If there's something that's a major surprise at the combine, it should not immediately lead you to change your board. What it should do is make you go back to the tape and look for the things that maybe the combine exposed. And sometimes it can kind of shed light on an issue that maybe you had missed before. So when I say the combine is overrated, I'm not saying it's completely useless, but I think that it needs to be viewed in context. And I think the context has kind of become distorted. because I do think that there are players for whom the combine matters. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about some draft prospects, some guys who could especially interest the Jets, for whom this combine matters quite a bit. That's ahead here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season does not have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Again, TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. You know, the offseason does not exist for the everydayer club. Join the group chat to talk Jets year-round and get every episode of the show ad-free. Head to LockedOnNYJets.supercast.com or hit the link in the show notes to learn more. Today on Locked On Jets, we are focused on the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. And in the first segment, I explained to you why I think the Combine is overrated. And I know that that's a controversial take. I know that there are not many people in the NFL media who feel that way. And I don't feel that the Combine is completely useless, but I do feel like the pendulum has swung in a really radical direction and that people put way too much stock into the Combine. That does not mean I think it's useless, though. Reiterating that, I think there are players, a number of players for whom the combine results will matter. We'll talk about some of the players who could be relevant for the Jets in this segment. And I think we can start by talking about the three edge rushers who are widely believed to be in play for the Jets with the second overall pick. And those are Arvell Reese out of Ohio State, Rueben Bain Jr. out of Miami, and David Bailey out of Texas Tech. Now, it would not be a surprise if these three guys sat out the athletic testing drills. Guys who are generally viewed to be high first-round picks sometimes don't do the athletic testing at the combine. They do the other stuff. They do the weigh-in, they do the interviews with the teams, they do the medicals, but they don't do the athletic testing. Typically, these guys wait for their pro days to do it because they're on more familiar terrain. The pro days take place at their school, at their own training facility where they're comfortable. If we're going to be perfectly honest, sometimes there are some things that happen at these pro days. There have been rumors that, the 40-yard course has a slight decline, so the guy's running downhill and maybe helps improve his 40 time a little fast. That's not something you would ever put beyond a college. So these are things to consider, but it will be worth watching. Now, I think Bain's the guy we could start with because I think there are questions about Bain's arm length. I actually don't know that a lack of length is that significant for an edge rusher. I think it hurts an offensive tackle more than it hurts an edge rusher because an offensive tackle needs to have a base. Offensive tackle needs to throw the first punch. He needs to have a good center of gravity, be able to reach out and make first contact without leaning on a pass rusher. A pass rusher has other ways to win. So I don't know how significant arm length really is. There are some people who are concerned with it. Bain seems like he's going to go high in the first round either way, but maybe if his arms come in a little bit longer than people are expecting, that will alleviate some concerns. There's also some thought out there that maybe Bain's not an elite athlete. I don't buy that for a second myself, but I've seen the thought process behind it. But if Bain does test and he tests very well, I think it's pretty much a lock. He goes high in the first round. It's probably going to happen anyway. Reese is a guy, if he does test, it would not surprise me if he shoots up draft boards. This is the classic guy where teams will get really excited if he kind of dominates. We talked a bit about Reese on Friday. We've talked about him quite a bit on this podcast over the last couple of weeks. And I'm not necessarily someone who thinks that Reese is destined for failure in the NFL, but I do think there are some big questions about him. I worry that he's like the classic product of scouting. Sometimes scouts like to show you how smart they are by projecting guys. Projections can be scary. Projections aren't always accurate, but if Reese goes out there and dominates the combine, this is going to be a guy who's going to get a tremendous amount of buzz for the Jets with the second pick. I feel like there are safer picks out there, but I can't rule out the Jets picking him at 2, particularly if he has a big combine, because people's imaginations will run wild. They'll talk about what he could be. And of course, that's very significant when you're talking about the second overall pick. So certainly a guy worth watching. David Bailey, also a guy who is expected to do really well at the combine, a guy who's expected to shoot up draft boards by doing well. I think a couple things to look out for him are, number one, how does he measure? Does he have the prototypical size you're looking for in an edge rusher? There are some people who are worried about that. And 2, does he meet expectations? I will say this. I would pump the brakes a little bit on Bailey if he does perform in the athletic drills and doesn't blow us away. I think that would be something that might send me back to the tape. As I said, I don't think a bad combine result should radically alter your board on its own, but I think it should send you back to the tape and maybe look for some things. So I think that'll be something worth watching. I think wide receiver is also a position where you got to keep an eye on things for the Jets. Jordyn Tyson out of Arizona State, a guy is a good prospect, but a guy who has suffered pretty serious knee injury in his career. So I think the medicals are going to be really significant with Tyson to see how that turns out. Guy who I've talked about a lot on the show, Makai Lemon out of USC, a guy who at this point would kind of be my dream pick at 16 with the Colts first round pick, the pick the Jets got in the Sauce Gardner trade. Lemon's more of a technician than he is a great athlete. But if he shows some short area burst, and I think Lemon's a guy who projects as somebody who's going to spend a lot of time in the slot in the NFL. And in the slot, because you tend to be running more horizontal than vertical. The guys who run vertically tend to be on the outside. The guys who run, break left or break right, they tend to be on the inside. So when you're breaking left, breaking right on short routes, your short area quickness is more significant. I'm not sure Lemon's going to dominate the short area drills, but if he puts in a representative showing, I think that will pretty much end doubts about his ability to hold up as a slot receiver in the NFL. Another guy we talked about recently, Denzel Boston out of Washington. His speed is a question with him. He's big. He depended a lot on contested catches. It's always a little dicey when you depend primarily on contested catches in college, because you go to the NFL and everybody's big, everybody's strong. Corners can win the ball at the point of attack. So this is a guy whose 40 time actually does mean a lot. I go back, Garrett Wilson, obviously a very different style player from Denzel Boston. But back in 2022, I think the one question with Garrett Wilson, did he have great speed? And he ran in the 4.3s. And that did not mean Garrett Wilson played at a 4.3 level. Some guys play faster than they time. Some guys play slower than they time. But Garrett Wilson running a 4.3 showed you he wasn't slow, that he could run with guys in the NFL. Denzel Boston, very different type of receiver, not at all the same stylistically, but I do think the 40 time matters for Denzel Boston in a way that it doesn't matter for a lot of other wide receivers. When we talk about the Jets picks potentially in the second round, Elijah Surratt's been a guy I've had my eye on for most of the college season. This was a guy who kind of popped on tape for me when I was watching Fernando Mendoza. Back in the days when Mendoza seemed like an actual possibility for the Jets, not so much now. I don't want to hear any of these rumors out there about the Raiders trading now. I don't believe that when I see it. Surratt's another guy whose speed is going to be significant. I'm going to be interested in his 40 time as well. Does he have? Can he? He's never going to be a great burner, but can he show functional speed? Because there's a lot. I think there's a lot to his game to like. I think that he's a guy who understands a lot of the nuances of route running, but the questions are the physical tools with him. How good can he be? And I think that if he posts a good combine, then he could be in play for the Jets with one of their second round picks, conceivably. I don't think that that's completely out of the realm of possibility. There's some other guys to keep an eye on. Caleb Banks, a guy we talked about on Friday out of Florida. I don't think he should be on the table for the Jets in the first round, but guy who could be interesting as a kind of a project type player, coming off a pretty serious injury. So the medicals are going to matter with him. And also, if he is able to go test out, he's a guy who's expected to do quite well. Avion Terrell, Clemson corner, kind of undersized. A guy who I would not completely rule out the Jets being interested in, but when you're smaller, the physical tools matter more. You're going to depend more on athleticism. You're going to depend more on speed. And then also at the corner position, generally the smaller guys, they've got to show some feistiness, which Terrell has. But I do think for an undersized guy, someone showing athletic tools is pretty significant. So those are some guys I think are worth keeping an eye on heading into the combine. It's all about keeping it in perspective. The combine matters, but it's not the end all. Too many people treat it as the end all. I think for each prospect, there are specific things you should look for. And these are some of the prospects and some of the specific things you should be watching out for. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to a guy who's here for now, at least. And that's Breece Hall. And based on recent updates, it sounds like everything's up in the air. We'll dive into it continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time of year to lock it in. I love futures this time of year. Whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title, it adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, it could also send you to the finals. I'm a little sad with the Olympics over. I really got into it rooting for our athletes from the opening ceremony right up to the thrilling overtime gold medal win by our hockey team over Canada. Well, now it's time to turn the page to the NBA, and FanDuel's the place to do it. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. Let's turn our attention now to Breece Hall, the number one free agent the Jets have heading into the offseason. His status is very unclear. Over the weekend, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler sent out a tweet saying the Jets are weighing all options on Breece Hall's future, including a tag and or an effort towards a long-term deal. Some league insiders expect the transition tag for Hall, which would be around $11.7 million, but that's yet to be determined. And this was a social media post that spread all over the fan base and led to all sorts of speculation. And I read what Jeremy Fowler wrote, and I think Jeremy Fowler is a really good reporter. So I don't mean anything negative personally towards him. And look, I know sometimes I say some silly things, but I think that there are moments where you're about to post something on social media, and it's better to just keep it in the drafts. And this would be one of them, because I don't know what we're really learning when you say the Jets are weighing all options with Breece Hall's future. I would hope they're weighing all options with Breece Hall's future. I mean, what are the alternatives? When you're making your offseason plan, when Breece Hall comes up as a topic, do you just decide to go to lunch? Just decide, let's just have a beach day or something? Obviously, it's not really beach season in the Northeast, and that's an understatement with the storm we're getting today. But of course, they're exploring all their options. I mean, they wouldn't be doing their jobs if they weren't exploring all of their options. Breece also spoke with the New York Post and gave some very boilerplate comments, the type of stuff that's non-committal that you'd expect a running back to say who's about to hit free agency. Said, whatever happens, happens. I'm just where my feet are and letting God and my agent handle everything else. I feel like my play speaks for itself, considering the situations I've been in the last few years. I'm going to get everything that's coming to me, so I'm not too worried about it. So that's, the classic non-committal statement you'd expect a free agent to make. People are trying to read into it. Some people are saying this means Breece wants to stay. Some people are saying, well, that's a sign Breece doesn't want to stay. I think when you're in this situation, your agent will typically tell you, just don't tip your hand. And that's where we're at right now with Breece Hall. A report and a statement from the running back, which people are trying to read all sorts of ways into, and which really tell us nothing. Now, what can we say about Breece Hall? I think the Jets need to keep him. My biggest thing heading into the trade deadline last year, it wasn't so much that I wanted to keep Breece or I wanted to trade Breece. I think I lean towards keeping him. I just wanted to see the Jets have like a coherent plan with Breece. And if you weren't going to keep him, well, you should have traded him at the deadline. There were reports the Kansas City Chiefs were willing to offer a fourth round pick. Could have been a very high fourth round pick. And the Jets are a team that is lacking in picks in those middle rounds. Jets made a lot of bad trades over the last couple of years that have deprived them of picks in the mid rounds. And you could say, well, the Jets have 2 first round picks, 2 second round picks, so they don't need picks in the middle rounds. Look at the roster. The roster right now is not in fighting shape, not even close to being in fighting shape. So the Jets need extra picks. For a normal team, maybe 2 1s and 2 2s would be enough to say, okay, our team will be fixed if we hit on these picks. Jets need more. Even with 3 first round picks in 27, Jets need more. So if you weren't going to keep Breece, you should have gotten a pick in the middle rounds. And in the right hands, a fourth round pick can be a real asset. You can get a good player with a fourth round pick. The fact that Jets kept Breece, I was fine with it. In fact, I even encouraged it. That to me means that you should keep him because you should not let him walk for free. Jets are not going to get a compensatory pick this year in the offseason. To get a compensatory pick, you need to lose more guys than you sign. Jets are going to get compensatory picks for what they did a year ago, but a year ago they were constrained against the salary cap. This year the team has salary cap space and it's lacking on talent. So even if the Jets let Breece walk, it's very unlikely they're going to look at a compensatory pick in return. So all this leads up to the bigger point, which is Jets are a team lacking in talent. Jets have cap space. And this year is projected to be a pretty weak year in free agency. There aren't a lot of guys who are attractive. And that's before we begun franchise tag season. And once the franchise tags start going out, a lot of the big names are going to come off the market. A lot of what was already a really weak free agent crop. So if the options aren't going to be great, keep your own guy. The Jets are a team that has like 5 good players on their roster right now. You're sitting on cap space. To me, this is one of those simple moves. You just keep one of the few talented players you've got. That's what cap space is for, isn't it? There's for some reason there's been rumblings about the Jets potentially using the transition tag on Breece. I gotta say, I don't understand that. As Fowler reported, the estimate for that's around $11.7 million. That's the transition tag. Jets could also use the franchise tag on Breece, which would be a little over $14 million, give or take. Those numbers aren't finalized until the league sets the salary cap for 2026. So there have been some estimates about what the salary cap is going to be, but we don't know exactly yet. So by putting the transition tag on Breece, you're saving less than $3 million in savings from what you'd spend putting the franchise tag on him. But the franchise tag offers you much greater protections. For all intents and purposes, if you put the franchise tag on a player, he's staying with you. There are mechanisms by which, a team conceivably could sign the guy. But when we're talking about the team giving up 2 first-round picks, the transition tag has no such requirements on it. Putting the transition tag on Breece essentially means that Breece can still seek contracts with other teams. It just means that if he signs a contract with a new team, the Jets can match it and keep him on the exact same contract, which are not great protections. If you want Breece Hall to be here next year, you should look at the franchise tag if you can't work out a longer-term deal. And I still think that the best thing for the Jets, at least, would be to try and figure out how to keep Breece here on a moderate long-term deal. I'm not saying the Jets should make Breece the top 3 paid running back in this league because he hasn't earned that, but he's shown he's a quality back. He's shown that he's got tools that could really help an offense. He's shown that he can be a home run hitter. And even if his game has some holes in it, I think if you put him in tandem with the right partner in the backfield, you put him in a platoon, he could be a great guy in that sort of scenario. Then there's a price where it makes sense for him. But if you can't meet that price, well, then I think you franchise tag him because I don't think the Jets are in position right now where they can afford to lose any of their good players. I don't know that should be a controversial statement. So I hope the Jets figure out a way to keep him around. I don't see the wisdom though in using the franchise and using the transition tag. I think if you use a tag, make the franchise tag, make sure he's here. Transition tag does not do that. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you don't miss an episode. If you enjoy the show or listening on a podcast, for us, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.